Designcast Podcast, the podcast for design and STEAM educators.
Hello and welcome to Designcast, a podcast where I interview a wide range of excellent guests in design and STEAM education to get their unique perspectives. My name is Jason Reagan, and I use my 20 plus years of experience as a design educator to dig deep into complex issues. This podcast has one simple mission: to create a community of people around the world that are interested in design and STEAM education. Each episode, I chat with guests from all corners of the design world, from classroom teachers to authors and even to educational consultants. We discuss a wide range of topics that we feel are relevant today. I do want to ask you that if you're enjoying this podcast, please leave a review, rate, subscribe, share, or download from your favorite podcasting app. This helps the podcast get discovered by listeners that might not find it otherwise. Also, it helps me to continually define the direction of future guests and episodes. Feel free to drop by my website, www.jasonreagan.ga, to leave me a comment or to sign up to be considered as a future guest on future episodes. Also, don't forget to stop by Anchor and leave me a voice clip that could even end up in an upcoming show. Thanks for listening, so let's get to it. For this episode of Designcast, I had the honor to talk with Steve Sostak from Inspire Citizens. Steve is passionate about many things, but we spend most of our time talking about his work with schools and the idea of empathy to impact. You can find out more about the awesome work that Steve and Inspire Citizens are doing through the links in the show notes. I have no doubt that you will want to find out more about his work after listening to this chat that we have. Now sit back, relax, and enjoy this episode with Steve Sostak. Welcome back to another episode of Designcast, and I'm just so honored to have Steve from Inspire Citizens with me today. Steve, how are you?
I'm good, Jason. I'm pretty humbled too, man. I love your podcast, and we had a chance to talk a little bit before already about some of your work and how our paths are crossing. So I'm just absolutely happy to be here, man. Thanks for the invite.
Oh, man, I'm just really honored that you agreed to chat with me, and I love your work, and it's just so funny how paths cross. And so I am just absolutely stoked to talk to you about the work, the great work that you're doing, and how people who are listening and myself can be involved in the work that you're doing. So thanks again for being here.
No problem. Let's do this.
Let's do this. Absolutely. So Steve, if you don't mind maybe introducing yourself and talking a little bit about what got you involved in education and where you are now.
Yeah. So to be honest, my path to education was really influenced a lot by my family, right? My mom was a teacher and a principal. My wife was a teacher. I was actually, when I graduated from university, I was actually a punk rock musician for about 6-7 years. So definitely a creative. I was traveling through Europe, traveling through Canada and the States, playing saxophone, and got to a point where that was not quite paying the bills in the way that I wanted it to, and made a shift over into the teaching space. And I realized pretty quickly that there's still a lot of opportunities to be, co-creative and a real creative thinker in teaching and learning, right? So it really drew me in when I started to, I went back and I started to work with and go to school with in-service teachers that were really diverse in Chicago. And it just got me inspired to get into the profession. Shortly thereafter, though, we went international. I went to Peru and kind of started a family down there, adopted a few girls, had a little one as well, and then ended up in Malaysia and China, where I've been now for 8 years. So I was a teacher in total for about 16, and then Inspire Citizens, Aaron, my co-founder, and myself, he was my actually co-teacher. He was my learning support co-teacher when I was a 6th grade humanities teacher in Beijing. And we just really connected. He's kind of a young doppelganger. We're both kind of covered in tattoos and really forward thinking, I think, in the way that we approach, student-centered learning. And we got to a point where we just thought we had a little more to give the world if we went beyond one school. And luckily that worked out, man. So we have been able to, work on all 5 of 7 continents and, work with kids, teachers, and administrators and parent communities to help transform education kind of around that, what we call empathy to impact, which is kind of heart, head, hands type model, where it's like, again, what do we care about and why? What do we need to learn how to do, to think and the skills, and then go do something with your learning, right? To make a difference in the world. So that's a lot crammed in there to that answer, but hopefully I got you where you need to go.
It's just so great to hear people's journey. I didn't know you were a punk rocker. That's super cool. And I think that, it's great to hear people's backgrounds who've come from other vocations before they went into teaching and then kind of what brought them into teaching. So thank you so much for sharing that with me. And tell me a little bit more about Inspire Citizens, sort of what started it, and tell me a bit more about sort of the structure and what work you do.
Yeah, so I think what really started it was, Aaron and I had some pretty good success with, whether you call it services action, design thinking, project-based learning, et cetera, in, inquiry, all the stuff that, we're doing quite well in sort of progressive student-centered classrooms, doing a really nice job at the International School of Beijing, doing that. And we actually had some opportunities to do some pretty innovative stuff there. We had a citizen sort of makerspace going on where the kids were, designed for impact. We often called that, where the kids were running workshops on things like building square foot gardens or, teaching out on how, windmills and hydroelectric, generators were working, et cetera. To, also doing futures, what we called futures public radio, which was basically the concept we came up with there was, what would it look like if kids were running NPR, right, from the US? So we had this sort of media maker space, but we also found that it was still quite pocketed, right? And while it was exciting and the school gave us space to do it, it wasn't really bleeding into other places, into interdisciplinary learning and spaces beyond the work that we were doing with our kids. So we kept kind of asking ourselves, what would it look like if we had a little more voice in that space of, designing curriculum on a more whole school or whole division level? And that's kind of where the idea of Inspire Citizens was born. And then we just got to a spot where we felt it was just time to give that a shot, like put that at the heart of everything we did and work with multiple different schools to kind of bring that vision to life. And actually Seoul Foreign was our first major partner, right? They took a pretty significant leap with us where we've been contracted with them for 4 full years, 100 days per year, to basically take the idea of empathy to impact and, this sort of services action, bringing it really to the center of everything the school is doing. And at this point now in year 4, I'd say they probably were looking at, 100 units throughout the school, plus all the service programs, et cetera, that are built around that type of philosophy, so that it brings their dedication to service, elements of their mission to really to life, and their whole community, is living it inside and out. So I got to give them a lot of credit, because they've been such a foundation to getting us started and giving us proof of concept. And, since then it's just been, full steam ahead.
Wow. I love to hear that. And they've really committed over at SFS to really take this on. So
most definitely. And I think one thing too, to put that into context as well, is we were really lucky also getting started. We had a group called 3W Education here in Beijing it was a little more of like helping kids from China make transitions to places like University in the States, et cetera. But they connected us with some people like Kevin Mattingly, who's the science of learning guy from Teachers College, Columbia. And we got to spend some time with Kevin really digging into just best practices in professional learning and really looking at what can transform a school's culture, right? And a lot of it's just is time, right? That building capacity over time and really getting into the deep cultural level of a school. So I got to give them a lot of credit for that, because it was something that was a commitment, and it did culturally change a lot of the thinking in the school. And we've used that now in a lot of ways. We partner with schools. We don't necessarily expect schools to go 100 days, and there's not enough of us to go around, right, with Inspire Citizens. But we do have, we try really hard, if we're going to be working with a school for a full year, to push towards about 15 to 20 days. right? At least so that we can really get to know people, build relationships with both students, teachers, and administrators and parents as well. And then go on that journey together, right? We're going to be there to support you, to coach you, to help you, we're not coming in to, deliver a pizza for a weekend and then disappear, right? And that's been a big thing. And then the other thing with that, I think that really resonates with educators, at least with Inspire Citizens, is we are teachers first, right? We still teach, not full time, but we still teach kids. We still co-teach with teachers in the schools we work with. We run tons of, active, interactive online workshops, et cetera. So when you walk into that room with the teaching staff, I think they sense the compassion. They sense the empathy and the idea of like, hey, we're not here to flip tables. We're here to help you. We're not here to overwhelm you. We're here to make your life better and the world better, right? And I think that resonates. So I think we've been very lucky to start off with that type of, that's just the pulse of what we do, the mission of what we do, and people seem to really connect with that.
Absolutely, man. I loved hearing about that. It sounds like the model is really working for you, because it's so hard sometimes in schools, even though people are passionate. Sometimes they don't know where to start. Sometimes they don't have the time to start. Sometimes they don't have the support to start. So it's great to have you guys come in who do this all the time and really work with the teachers and like you said, those community members. So that's awesome, man. Hats off to you guys.
And Jason, something that's really also important, I think, there is that idea of, I work a lot. One of my mentors is this guy named Greg Curtis. He wrote a fantastic book recently. You should read it. It's called Moving Beyond Busy. And it's all about kind of what we were just talking about, right? But we've talked about sketching out a book together called Meeting in the Middle, where, this has to be something that's kind of really coming from, both sides of administration and the grassroots of students and teachers, right? And we'll talk about this as we go forward. We were talking about things like a happiness index, or a true commitment to wellness or sustainability, or, inner sustainability balance with outer sustainability as a through line, right? Like, what is sort of that common essential why of your school that then all of your initiatives feed, right? And if the administrators and what's going on the ground are not connected with that, obviously that's where things like, demoralization or initiative overload, or just, people are just feeling lost. The communication pathways aren't open, and that's such a major piece for success in this space, right? And then the last thing that we've been doing a lot recently, that's also something over the last year we've really worked on our own professional growth in, is what we call a constellation mindset, or a deliberately developmental mindset, where it's like, in our learning communities, we got to be vulnerable with each other, right? We got to know that it's okay that we're not perfect, that we have limitations, or we have strengths, and we have passions, and we're real people. And let's put some of that on the table, and let's connect some of our personal growth goals to some of our professional growth goals, right? So we did that even inside Inspire Citizens with our team. And for me, one is a lot has to do with things like perfectionism, right? And being able to tell my team that I struggle with that. I'm going to need some support with that. How do we put that alongside as we're breaking forward on new initiatives, right? So then I'm growing as a person, and it's also connected to some of my professional goals. And I think that's something we don't always do at schools. We tend to silo ourselves. I think we tend to be a little bit quiet about some of where we're at with our feelings, right? And I think that's just such an important thing. So again, I think that communication stuff we work on with schools, building capacity as teachers first, and then opening the lines of communication for teachers and administrators to be vulnerable within their teams. I think you can really it just really changes the dynamic in a school. It's exciting.
It is exciting. I can hear your passion as you're talking about it. And you're right. I mean, I think people are afraid sometimes to be vulnerable, especially in a situation where you're supposed to be professional and you're supposed to be this and that. And somewhere along the way, we've gotten that skewed, and we're not allowing for our true selves to always be shown, and that's a shame. So I'm really hoping that we're going to be able to refocus as things start to kind of shake back out here soon.
And that comes, that dials into what we were talking about earlier as well, with yourself as, for instance, an MYP coordinator, and leaning towards the DP in the International Baccalaureate is how do we recenter ourselves on the things like the approaches to learning or the learner profile as, or our mission words as our real transformative learning whys? And then how is it that we are actually, qualitatively providing feedback and evidence of that to our outward facing community, such as our parents? Because you know damn well that if we're just in the end, we're in, and it's not, we know it's not all we worry about, but when we put out those IB scores, for example, a whole lot of other stuff loses value, right? And and then what happens is teachers get stressed, right? Because, and justifiably, where you're worrying about, are my kids going to get their 5, 6, or 7, and that's what we're pushing out to the community as kind of a really heavy measure of our success. So I think again, a lot of it comes back to being really open about what is success in 2022, right? And high IB scores are an element of that. I do think if we zoom out, right now, the world is asking us to think differently. And I think that, a 7 isn't going to necessarily, it's not the end of, it's a great score, but it's right now, it's not going to necessarily help us with compassionate empathy. It's not going to necessarily ensure that our kids are creative and imaginative thinkers. And it's not necessarily going to ensure that our kids understand what it means to be happy.
Sure thing. I totally agree, man. I couldn't have said it better myself. Thank you for that, Steve. And so, Steve, as your website, I've been checking it out, of course, recently. And you also have like a master's endorsement as part of your work. Can you tell me some more about that?
Of course. Yeah. So that was something that's kind of a funny story, is we always laugh at ourselves as saying we wanted to set up a teaching system for like almost like a Jedi council, right? We're kind of getting our Star Wars nerd angle in there. But to honestly, that idea of what would it look like if we took all of the different tools and also that concept of us as we continue to evolve as teachers. So, even as I'm writing this course, I'm literally in the middle of course, the second cohort of this master's endorsement. And I'm, bringing in new pieces to, my own learning. Sometimes I'm writing 2 weeks in advance of the course, and I'll find a new podcast or a new way of thinking about things. So it's an exciting space where we look at how do we kind of take empathy to impact and build it into a in-service or pre-service type teaching experience, right? Imagining what it might look like in a university setting, which we're actually looking at eventually doing, and helping our teachers to kind of connect with some of the things that, you and I were just talking about. So if you imagine empathy to impact, we look at it through the lens of care, aware, and impact or action. So we're asking, what do you care about and why? How are we going to become more responsibly and credibly aware through experiences in our research? What kinds of interdisciplinary skills and technology, integration skills are we going to need to apply or be able to then take enhanced action with the partner community, for example? And then we build 4 courses within that experience around each of those. And we say, for care, for example, let's unpack the language of the SDGs, or let's unpack the language of social justice, or 21st century donut economics, or the ledger of humane technology, the harms, like what's going on, and helping our teachers to get that metacognitive language that then they can take to their students in units or projects and say, let's actually connect now your project idea to something the world needs, right? So taking something you might be passionate about, like you do personal project in grade 10, let's say you got a kid who's just a fantastic painter, right? All right, well, I'm going to paint. Well, for what? What are we painting for? Who are we going to be sharing this with, et cetera? So without getting into the full stages of the master's program, the next stage would, briefly is, now let's look at research. How do we do media? How do we do interviews? How do we do data literacy? So we call those often modern or civic literacies. And then we look at things like technology and transmedia literacies, which is all the things kids are doing on social media outside of school. So like kids are curating Instagram, kids are writing fan fiction, right? So how are we parlaying those types of skills, right? And then lastly, what does it mean to take action? So, the enhanced PYP has some great language. We've kind of extended on that. And then we always say, connect to your community. Do a community asset survey, really live that idea of think global, act local, right? We really sometimes forget that as our kids are doing their projects or their global, connecting to these global issues potentially, we often don't look inwards, right? And sometimes our campus is probably the best place where we could have kids doing these things, right? In the way that we maybe green up our campus, for example, or inside the city or the smaller micro community that we live. How are we connecting some of these bigger ideas to what we can actually get these kids to do? And that ties back to that, heart, head, hands, right? Where we want them to apply it. We want them to do it. We want them to feel it. That's where you get into that range of real compassionate action, right? That was a long answer, but basically we take the teachers through that experience and all of those tools I just mentioned over a full year. It's about 25 weeks. And then we give them a coaching quarter where we spend, about 6 to 8 weeks where they take elements of what they learned and either build it into a unit. They might build it into something they're working on with their team. Depending, we even have some people that are, education providers like the Hutong, that take kids into communities and they're using some of our toolkit. And then we just go sort of coach, and then they get the Inspire Citizens tattoo and the micro stamp, right? But it's really at this point, it's still kind of a labor of love experience. We have had about 25 people in each of our first two cohorts. And it's been fantastic because there's an asynchronous element, but then every week we have a Socratic seminar where we check in with everybody on a Saturday. So you get that face-to-face time with the cohort and the community that's built with those people. Actually, last night I just had dinner with 5 of us. My little Beijing group that's in this year's cohort. We overeaten some Malaysia food over by Roma Lake. So yeah, it's a really fantastic experience. I wish, I'm looking at how to scale it slightly. That's a big thing for me this next year, but also without losing the intimacy. Because I think that, again, coming back to that relationship component, I think we got to find a way to, more of these quote unquote Jedis in the mix. And once they are, it's, kind of spread. That's that real grassroots, right?
Sure thing. Yeah, absolutely, man. And I can only imagine as countries cope with COVID aftermath that more and more of these kinds of programs you're describing are going to be in high demand as students. I think about my own kids and their online learning and all these other things. The last time my 7th grader was in a full school year uninterrupted was in grade 4. And so there's a whole lot of that social interaction that's been lost. I'm not going to say learning gaps. We can get into that on a whole nother podcast episode. But this idea that reconnecting with the community, reconnecting with his own community is going to be really important. And so I think it's great. You already have the framework and the mindset there. It's fantastic, man. I know you guys are doing some great work. Thank you so much. What's your vision? Where do you think you're going to go, Steve? What do you want to do?
Well, I was actually going to kind of follow up with that, and this ties in really well, is really, I'm wondering, again, is how to take what we were just talking about in that teacher space. And I've been also working on putting similar type of experiences together for kids. Right. So you brought up your 7th grader. It would be great to get him to trial some of the stuff that I've been just creating. Like, so for example, this is a good example for a kid's experience that then teachers in theory could take on, and it becomes quite student driven. But we have this program that we've been putting together called Photobomb, right? And it's all about using the philosophies of, do you know the philosophy of wabi sabi, it's a Japanese philosophy that's built completely on finding beauty in transience and imperfection, right? So it helps a lot of our kids to kind of let go of thinking they need to be perfect, right? And looking at the world around us and appreciating how things age, using photography to connect to those things, whether it's nature, architecture, or ourselves. And then we also use what's called the principles of harmony with nature. It's out of a group out of the UK called the Harmony Project. And we look at things like interdependence and cycles and adaptation and geometry in nature. And we start to see, wow, we are nature. We're connected to nature. We're connected to each other in the similar ways that nature is dependent. Because again, I think that head and heart, we've been, I think, quite cognitive over the last, however many years, and bringing the heart kind of back into these learning experiences. And man, it's been fantastic at WAB, at Western Academy Beijing. I ran it with kids in person, and now I'm actually building it into an online learning experience. So the kids get a chance to learn a little bit about photography, right? So that's that kind of the thinking like a photographer or advocacy photographer. And then they get a chance to connect that to a why, which in this case, that heart is harmony with nature or dealing with perfectionism and seeing the beauty in impermanence. And then the hands is let's go take photos and change the world or change ourselves, right? The way we see the world or the way the world can be framed differently to advocate for more connections with nature or letting go of certain stresses. So that's kind of where I'm at. And I'm working with this new group called High Resolves out of Sydney, Australia. And they're really building, they've got a fantastic program called Videos for Change. Dude, it's amazing because what they've created is this sort of package where you can, and it's got tons of great student-driven resources and teacher resources if you wanted to do it as a full division or a unit or excuse me, as a team or even a full school film fest. And what they've done is they've built the platform that you can basically buy a platform from them that then is an entire website that hosts your film fest and all the behind the scenes, threads such as like your parent permission forms and like how to set up your judging. And like, it's pretty amazing. They've been working on it for about 3 years and it's actually also quite affordable. So same type of thing where I'm excited because what this sets up, things like Photobomb and Videos for Change, is you've got sort of your modern literacies built into that, but you also have a lot of tons of interdisciplinary opportunities. You've got the purpose, the heart and the why built into it. Kids want to have a voice and feel like they can take action, right? But then there's also elements of like, especially in Videos for Change, where are you getting your information from, right? Who are you interviewing potentially? And that connecting back to communities and or where we're seeking the truth. It's such an important piece of this, right? So I'm pretty excited about that's the work I'm going forward with. A lot is sort of a future of education and future of media literacy space. One other piece that you'll love is we do a thing, we've connected to a podcast out of Baltimore called Out of the Blocks. And it's kind of a Humans of New York, but focusing on like, we are going to photograph, interview, and get sounds of one city block or one small neighborhood. And then we're going to mosaic that story together into a podcast experience. And we actually have done that at Soul Foreign. And it's just, they call it Into the Goo instead of Out of the Blocks. And yeah, it's fantastic. So we're looking again at like, how do we scale these kind of opportunities for kids to build deeper, compassionate empathy for themselves, for others, and for nature, right? And if we can use media to sort of get kids hooked on that, even better, because then you bring in that idea of humane technology.
Man, this is great. This is really, really great. And, honestly, I think it's really relevant, especially now, because when we all, in many cases, had to go online with our teaching, a lot of these sorts of things were lost or put on hold. And it's unfortunate. And it probably was needed more during that time than it has. And so it's great that you guys are positioned to really help schools as they emerge to either a hybrid mindset or a back on campus kind of mindset and begin kind of going through getting to know each other again, because we've been back on campus pretty much full time for a couple months now. And it's taken a while for everyone to kind of get back on their feet and to build their bandwidth again, because, you don't use those muscles for a while, they start to atrophy, right? And so it's really good that you guys are in the position to be able to help schools transition back onto a normal setup.
Yeah. And I mean, actually, too, you wonder, you use that word normal. And I think a lot of, and this is the chance for us to breathe, I think, and actually ask ourselves what matters. Right. And again, I'm not naive in the way that, of course, there's going to be certain things that are going to systemically need to be there. Right. But I do think that this is also an opportunity for us to embed things like, let's take a little bit more time. Let's not fall into the trap. You brought up the idea of learning loss. Let's not fall into the trap of like allowing ourselves to freak out about, that particular element, right? This is kind of what I feel like in some ways, this is what the world is telling us. The world has dealt us this, in a lot of ways, I do think it's come from the way that we've interacted with things such as, our natural environment. So what are we going to learn from that, right? How are we going to shift slightly, or in some cases, a bigger shift into reimagining what some of these experiences can be? and what kind of kids, that how are we helping kids to make sense of this, right? And it's definitely not going to be by cramming in reading, writing, and math all the time, right? It's not to say that's not important, but we should be taking this time, I think, to help kids to how do we have a good conversation? How do we reconnect with the natural world? How do we actually embed time to reflect and be mindful in our classrooms so that you're a design teacher. So how do we then do real design that matters, right? And I think that's what gets me excited. And I do think, I believe in this concept that the earth is kind of telling us something. And that's what I hope we can sort of reset that new normal, right? And say, hey, there's a way that we can find that middle path between the way things were and probably the way things really need to be.
Right. Agreed. I've had a lot of time to think about that over the last 24 months. And I agree with you. I think there's a readjustment, a recalibration that can take place. And I think that your work is a major part of that. And so, Steve, this is great, man. Thank you so much for sharing with me all the work that you're doing and what your vision is. So what do you think is going to happen next? What's next for Inspire Citizens?
Well, it's interesting because I was mentioning, I'm going to be doing a little bit more work going forward over the next semester, moving into this high resolves space, which is for me is quite exciting because it's going to be an opportunity to get a little bit or a lot bit outside of the international school bubble, right? So being able to sort of take the Inspire Citizens approach, thinking, professional learning, work we do into a little bit more of a space that I think is going to be a little bit more scalable and equitable. I'm quite excited about it. And it's going to be a challenge for me because, again, you were saying we're going deep here, and there is an element of like, to really do this well, we got to go deep, and that's okay. But I'm also excited to personally learn a little more about how to go wide at the same time. Right. Aaron and Scott Jameson, you should, by the way, Scott he's like the third guy right now in Inspire Citizens. He's amazing. He runs a podcast, an Empathy to Impact podcast. That's all interviews with kids. So it's the voices of the kids talking about their learning. We decided, as a joke here about us being two teacher talking heads, we decided there's enough great teacher talking head podcasts out there like yours. So let's try something different. Man, he's just killing it. Like the interviews are so good with these kids, and he's kids all around the world and building wells in Uganda and doing equity rights in Senegal and talking about perfectionism in Beijing, and the interviews are fantastic. So that's something that we're going to continue to pursue, is putting kids' voices out there. And then Scott and Aaron are going to really continue with the on-site day-to-day grind of what Inspire Citizens does, keep that going with the partner schools that we work with. And it's kind of cool. We've been expanding out. We're working with Bangkok and Prague and Chile and some Central American schools. And so it's going beyond kind of that Asia pocket. Yeah, slowly growing. And hopefully that's another thing with this master's program. As we grow, we can kind of rein in a few of those fantastic educators to maybe join us on this journey and just slowly grow as we need to grow.
Steve, this is great, man. Like, I could literally sit here and talk to you all day long, but I know you're a busy dude and I appreciate it. So you gave me a book, this Greg Curtis, Moving Beyond Busy, which I will add to the Goodreads shelf that I have. And so if people want to find out more about the work that you're doing, Inspire Citizens doing, what's the best way to find that out, Steve?
Yeah, I would say just start with our website, right? There's so much. One thing, Jason, before I go, that we also, really put out there is we really want to capture proof of concept, right? So I think if you go to our website, you'll see when you go into the vignettes page or you go into the Futures Media pages, there's tons of student work there, a lot of, and the Empathy to Impact podcast, lots of ideas of like, let's get out of the sort of the headspace and the theoretical language and let's get on the ground, see what it looks like, and see if this is working, right? So inspirecitizens.org, you'll get a lot of the heady stuff, but you'll really see what it looks like on the ground. And then on Twitter, that's kind of my main place that I do my social media posting and telling my stories. It's at InspireCitizen1. So drop that S and add a 1. And that's pretty much it, man. I'm pretty good about getting back when people contact me through either the website or Twitter. Yeah, I just love seeing what other people are doing. So don't hesitate to send feedback, ideas, questions, et cetera. And, we like to work with anybody that wants to make a difference on the planet.
Absolutely, man. And I'll make sure all those links from the show notes, and I will attest to you being very quick to get back in touch with me. So I appreciate you doing that, man, during a busy time of the year. So Steve, again, thanks so much for this. I hope we can follow up in maybe a year or so and kind of hear how things have grown and changed as the world has changed. But I appreciate all the work you're doing, man. Thank you so much for sharing.
Yeah, I'd love to talk again. And thank you, Jason. And I'll see you soon, man. I'm just excited to finally meet face to face.
This podcast is a proud member of the Teach Better Podcast Network. Better today, better tomorrow, and the podcast to get you there. Explore more podcasts at www.teachbetterpodcastnetwork.com. We'll see you on the next episode.
I hope you enjoyed that episode of DesignCast. I'm Jason, your host, and I produced and created this podcast. If you have any input, I would love to hear from you, and I look forward to seeing you again really soon.